Yeah, I actually think we should have cameras in the courtroom.
This courtroom?
I think in all courtrooms.
Okay.
I think it's part of today. Look, the whole idea is they're supposed to be public. And so it's like this fake version of public. It's public, but it's only a tiny little door on how you get in, and there's only so much space inside. Public today means this. Public today means it goes out over the airwaves and people can see it. So I'm a believer in cameras.
You know, we're kind of confused about this because we thought at one point that the judge herself, who's talked a lot about openness and the strong public interest in a case like this, that she could decide to open up the court to cameras. Apparently now we're not sure that it may have to be the Supreme Court, John Roberts.
Or Congress.
Or
Congress, exactly.
Yeah.
So it may not happen. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that can be done to give the American people an opportunity, you know, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, to see this trial. It's such a big deal.
Yeah, I personally, and I'm just doing this, I don't like the fact that it gets filtered through the lenses of everybody else who had the small group that made it in the front door to see it. This is public. And part of public is I want to see it with my own eyes.
So, Senator Warren, you and Ayanna Pressley were probably the two biggest advocates for the broadest possible student loan forgiveness program. We all know what the Supreme Court did. It would have covered and benefited 40 million Americans. Immediately after it was struck down, Joe Biden implemented unilaterally, I know it's got to go through the regulatory process, some income-driven repayment relief thing. 40 million under the thing that was struck down by the Supreme Court, 804,000 benefited. What happens to the other 39 million?
So the answer is we're still working on it. And here's how I want to think about that. First, let's do the Supreme Court opinion. This is a case where if you already didn't believe in the United States Supreme Court because of how they burned their own credibility over abortion, over voting rights, this one is just, and affirmative action, this one is just a gobsmacker. They don't have an actual plaintiff, which is absolutely necessary for us lawyer types, someone who's injured who comes into court. First of all, that's what they do not have, and this case never should have been there. But second, the actual words of the statute were that in a time of emergency, the president's team is authorized to modify or waive, right, student loan debt. They just ignore the actual language of the statute and decide that they should better decide what Congress should allow the president to do. They should decide it instead of Congress. However you feel about student loan debt, this is one for which watching what the court is doing is genuinely frightening. They're not just overturning old precedent. They're actually saying, we're just going to reach out and start substituting our decisions for policy decisions made by Congress, policy decisions made by the President of the United States. The whole idea of separation of powers was the Supreme Court got to kind of go last, but really narrow. Had to look at the world through a straw, right? Only could have cases in controversy. Only could have cases that were ripe. Only could have cases where there was an injured plaintiff in, and only could do it if you had a federal question, right? All the way down on this. So I just want to start there with how wrong the Supreme Court was on that. But here's the good news. President Biden still has a lot of tools in the toolbox. And so when the Supreme Court says you can't do it this way, that's all they can say on this. The question is, keep rummaging around in the toolbox, how many other tools are available here? Let me give you a little bit of good news. His administration has already canceled, done, we're finished, student loan debt for 3.4 million people. It's not that's good, that's right. It's not the 43 million that we're going to be in the broader group, but 3.4 million, it's not chopped liver. This is actually people who are getting help. It's tens of thousands of people right here in Massachusetts who've seen their debt go away. Just last week, another 7,400 people got their student loan debt canceled. So that's part one, is just keep turning over every place that there's a slice of people that you can cancel student loan debt for. Part one. Part two is he's doing what's called negotiated rulemaking. He's using another tool in the toolbox to come back and say, I'm still going to do broad relief. I'll just do it by dotting every I, crossing every T that's there in the statute. And here's the part I care so much about. He's actually getting relief out the door. The income-based repayment plans, talk about something that's been underreported on. Yeah, I want to cancel student loan debt. I want to cancel it because I think we've engaged in intergenerational theft from our young people. My daddy was a janitor. I wanted to be a public school teacher. I could do that because I could go to a 4-year college on $50 a semester. Today, we tell kids to take on tens of thousands of dollars of debt to try to do the same thing. Or say to them, as some people now do, just don't even try. I think that is fundamentally wrong, and we need cancellation of a huge part of the debt that's out there. But income-determined repayment plans, this is already in the statute. And finally, we have an administration that's stepping up and starting to use it. So people who try college and it doesn't work out and they don't make much money, they're not actually going to owe all that money on the other end. We're getting this system worked out. It's not perfect, not all the way there yet. But to say to people, you go into public service, you just have to pay a fraction of what you earn, and at the end of 10 years, you're done. You're just done. Whatever debt is still out there. Don't go into public service, same kind of deal, fraction, but you've got to go longer, 20 years. It's a long time, but it's a modest amount of money. It's at least a step toward investing in people who are trying to invest in themselves and are not already wealthy. And I think that's something we ought to do.
You know, Senator Warren, what do you say to the people, I'm sure you hear from them all the time, who say, you know, I didn't go to college because I knew I couldn't afford it, or I went to a community college for 2 years and then I went out because I knew I couldn't afford it, or I struggled to pay back the debt that I owed, and they don't like this because they didn't get this kind of consideration.
You know, I'm really left to say, when did we become an America that says, you know, people didn't get health care when I was younger, and therefore I don't want anybody to have it now. People couldn't get an education when I was younger, so I don't want anybody to have it now. We kept poor kids, we kept kids of modest means from even having a chance, so I don't want them to have a chance right now. When did we become that America?
That's a good question. I don't know. When did we?
But I'll tell you something else about it. Investing in education for our young people is investing in America's future. This is not just you benefit from a generous public education program. Think of it this way. When GIs returned from World War II, a grateful America said, you get an education, we're going to pay for it. And then what happened?
If you're white.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we narrowed up who got it, but watch what happened for those who were able to take advantage of it. They paid back an estimated 7-fold over the amount of benefits they got just in the higher taxes they paid, because instead of their earnings doing this, their earnings did this. And what happened to the rest of America? Our GDP shot through the roof because we had a better educated population. So for me, this is about we invest in education, yes, because for each individual who gets a chance, each individual whose only sin is I wanted to get an education, I was born into a family that couldn't write a check for it. For each one of those people, it's a benefit, but it's a benefit for all of us. It will make us a richer nation to invest in the education of our young people.
Someone might call it infrastructure for families. You ever heard of that before?
Yes, infrastructure for families.
We're talking to Elizabeth Warren.
Speaking of infrastructure for families, when you were running for president, I thought one of your most appealing policies was the idea that, and correct me if I have this wrong, but I think it was that people wouldn't have to spend anywhere than 7% of their income for child care, which I thought every parent in America should vote for this woman because people are going broke, college loans, rent, mortgage, child care, which is astronomical. That didn't happen. I think Joe Biden tried in his first bill, the Would You Have American Rescue, something. That didn't happen. But now you've got another plea to the President of the United States about
in all
child
fairness,
care.
there were billions of dollars in the American Rescue Plan for child care. You're worried because it's expiring.
That's
Isn't that
right.
your deal?
In fact, it is expiring now. And I'm actually pushing right now that we get a $16 billion infusion because we're going to lose child care for about 3 million children in this country. Anyone want to think about the implications of that? Not only household by household, family by family, but again, for our whole economy. You know, those little kids, you can't just strap them on your back and take them with you to work. And so I'm trying to get money right now. But back to your question, and that is, give me a Democratic Senate and Democratic House and Joe Biden back in the White House. We've got our bill ready to go. And what it says is child care, nobody in America has to spend more than 7% of their income on child care. And one more part, we're going to raise the wages of child care workers commensurate with the responsibility and the kind of work they do.
You know what's interesting to me, though? This seems to be one that should have the Republican support as well, because obviously millions of Republicans have little kids, and they're grandparents of kids that are struggling. It gets nowhere, though, with the GOP. What is that about?
You know, I feel so frustrated on these things that people often talk about me, and they say, oh, you're very progressive, and they talk about this long political line and, you know, this end and that end. At the end of the day, the kind of things that I'm out there fighting for, like universal child care, like better access to higher ed, like raising the minimum wage, like expanding Social Security and taxing billionaires and billionaire corporations. I'm just naming a few here. They are really popular.
Very popular.
And they are popular. Here's the thing. They're not just popular among Democrats. They're popular among independents. And most of these are popular among a majority of Republicans want to see us do these things. And what you've got is this disconnect in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives, these elected leaders who don't reflect what the majority, even of their own party, wants to see them to do, and yet they think their electoral future lies with fighting culture wars, with digging in and trying to demonize programs that really would help American families.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, I have a couple of questions about the Senate, and let's take one, and then I've got another. Mitch McConnell did a press availability the other day, I'm sure you've seen it, in which it appeared to me as a viewer he was having a stroke or some such thing. He went back to his office, came back, and continued speaking. Your Democratic colleague, Dianne Feinstein from California, according to news reports, was told by her staff the other day how to vote in a committee hearing. There are strong arguments, at least to me, that are made that neither of them have the ability to competently continue to serve. What's your position on McConnell and Feinstein?
Look, I hope that Mitch McConnell is okay. I hope his health is good. Same thing for Senator Feinstein. We don't have a process in the United States other than elections. And people run for election. And the voters are the one who make the choice about who will represent them. People may decide that they're not going to serve out a term. But other than that, it's up to the voters.
You don't think as a leader you have a responsibility to say, I don't think California is being adequately represented. I don't think Kentucky is being adequately represented as a national leader like you are?
I think that is for the people of California and the people of Kentucky to
One
decide.
other Senate thing. You're working on a bill to create a commission around big tech, which the lack of regulation concerns, I think, much of America, with a guy by the name of Lindsey Graham. You're working on some bank regulation, which is sort of your bread and butter with J.D. Vance. Mm-hmm. Both of these guys are ones who think the re-election of a man who is credibly accused of trying to overturn a democratic election in this country is the right way for America to go. So this is not a policy question. It's rather a personal question. How hard is that when you know that when they're not working with you on what you care about, they're essentially trying to destroy the democracy?
I so much want to get done what we can get done over the next, we still got a year and a half, right, on this. I so much want to see us put the right tech regulations in place, so much want to see us put the right banking regulations, because it's good for the country. And so if I can find partners to work on that actually increase the odds that we can make it through a divided Senate and House, then I'm going to fight on that issue, and I keep it to that issue.
Is it hard?
It is sometimes a challenge, But it's my job. This is what I was sent to the United States Senate to do. I wasn't just sent there to disagree with people and to stand up every day and shake my fist over the things I don't like. I was sent to do what I can and get things done. And you don't just get things done by talking to your friends. You don't just get things done by rounding up the people who agree with you. You get things done by persuading people who disagree with you or who usually don't listen to you. You get things done by bringing those folks in and trying to build a majority so you can get it passed through the Senate, get it passed through the House, and get it to the president's desk to get it signed.
You know, for people who don't know, what are you and J.D. Vance trying to do about banks?
So the thing we're trying to do there, you remember how the banks crashed?
Yep.
And back up just a little bit on why they crashed. Okay, go back. 2008, we have the big crash. We put Dodd-Frank in place. And a big part of Dodd-Frank was to say those super big banks are going to have extra supervision, right? Guess what? Super big banks didn't like that. So Donald Trump actually ran for president saying to the super big banks, these so-called mega regionals, these multi-billion-dollar banks, if you get me elected president, I will weaken the banking regulations. And lo and behold, he got elected and he followed through. He put in people who were willing to play fast and loose on the banking regulations. That was not good enough. Those folks, including the CEOs of the banks that actually ultimately failed, came back to Congress, lobbied Congress, and said, weaken the rules even more. And all of the Republicans and a sizable number of Democrats went along with that. I kept saying, do not do this, do not do this. But it was a message to the CEOs. The CEOs said, ooh, have we got a deal here? Because what we can now do is that we can take incredible risks with our business. For example, SVB Bank dropped their interest rate hedge. They made the assumption interest rates are at historic lows. They will always be at historic lows. So they didn't pay for the hedge, boosted their profits, then paid themselves fabulous bonuses and salaries out of this, right? Then SVB collapses, and the CEO says, so sorry it collapsed, but I'm keeping all my money. So what J.D. Vance's in my bill is about is to say, not so fast, bub. If you actually crash your bank, we can go back and take away these extraordinary bonuses and high salaries that you paid yourself. And the idea behind it is not just to be punitive. The idea behind it is to align incentives and say, if you make choices that put your bank in a position to blow the bank up, and it truly does blow the bank up, you're going to lose all those profits you paid yourself in the interim. That's what the bill is about.
How much do you worry about the future of democracy? I mean, just this week, Elizabeth Warren, we read 69% of Republicans in a poll believe that Joe Biden is not the legitimate president of the United States. We saw that Joe Biden, at least a moment in time, tied with Donald Trump on the eve of his third indictment, 43-43. I'm sure you read the Fox News poll. I'm sure you read the 300 of the MAGA people in the polls. 300 out of 300 thought that Donald Trump had done nothing wrong. Even if he loses the election, if he's the nominee, he's probably going to get 70 million votes, 80 million votes. Do you worry about the future of democracy?
Yeah, I worry a lot about it. I mean, this is really the part that 3 o'clock in the morning at my house is not a good time and good place. Because this is the part that really scares me. I'll go head to head with you on any policy you want to talk about. But we now have a major political party in the United States that has openly said the way they intend to keep power is by preventing American citizens from voting or not counting the votes that they actually cast. Think about what that means. That the way they intend to keep power is to undermine the very core of our democracy. I am so worried about where we are. Talk to the folks who study how a democracy becomes a dictatorship, and you remember the elements, right? There's a refusal to accept the outcome of an election. It's followed by violence. But here's always the key. The party that lost and engaged in the violence does not throw out the violent offenders, does not say, not us, not our party, that takes out the whole foundation on which democracy is based.
Well, it seems to me that part of the problem, Margie and I talk about this ad nauseum, is the Supreme Court that more often than not comes out with wildly anti-majoritarian decisions. I don't know if you're in this. Are you a court expansion person?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. So we spent some time with Kamala Harris the other day, and we asked her, we said, Joe Biden emphatically does not support expansion of the Supreme Court. So in light of the fact that the 3 Trump justices are in their 50s, could be there for 30 years through 8 presidencies, what's the Biden plan to deal with this rogue court? I don't know if they have one. What is the plan?
So let me just make a little case here for why we should expand the court.
Sure.
And that is, understand this. I was a law professor for many, many years.
We heard.
You've heard that,
Yes.
before. The idea of messing around with the Supreme Court is something that just like frizzles my eyelashes. It's, no, we don't do that. The court stands separately and independently. But this court is an extremist court. It has burned its own credibility. It refuses to follow just basic ethics issues here. It's this court has, as you rightly say, they've taken away constitutional rights. They're aggrandizing power. So there comes a point when you say, I'm for leaving the court to itself to work through. There comes a time when it is so extremist, so far out there, it is putting our very democracy at risk. And when that happens, then you've got to think about how you pull some balance into this. Remember, we don't need a constitutional amendment to change the number of justices. The number of justices has been changed 7 times before. I believe that we need to make the change now, and we need to put in 4 reasonable people to pull this court
Did you ever
back
discuss
into
that with
some
Joe Biden?
balance. I'm not going to talk about any private conversations, but what I will tell you about this is when people say to me, aren't you just worried then the Republicans will get back in and then they'll add 5 and then, you'll add 12 and there'll be 190. There'll be nobody left in America who's not on the Supreme Court. I do want to say about this, though, the first thing we got to do, if we can change the Supreme Court already by definition, we've gotten rid of the filibuster. Because as long as the filibuster's there, we're not changing the Supreme Court, we're not doing abortion, we're not doing gun safety, but the key one, we're not doing voting rights. Because the Republicans have blocked us on even doing basic voter protection. My view is, if we get in and we actually put serious voting protection in place, then I'll go with whatever democracy does. That's all I want to see.
We know you got to go. One last Supreme
Okay.
Court thing, which frizzles my something or other, is when Chief Justice Roberts refused to appear before the Senate Judiciary Committee and basically said everything's fine here, what's to see? The 3 liberal justices signed on to that letter, and at least I think I'm speaking for Margie in our opinion, basically provided cover to Roberts and the other 5 conservatives. What do you think about what the 3 of them did on this ethics
Let me just
issue?
do all 9. I think all 9 are wrong. I think it is the job of the United States Congress to put rules in place for the Supreme Court. Read the Constitution. There are places in the Constitution where we set this up. How do you think they get paid? They get paid because of what we do in Congress, right? How they get that building. They get it because of what we do. We're the ones who set up things like what the scope of their jurisdiction is. So, yes, we have a responsibility here, and we have a responsibility as Congress to make sure that every federal employee is following some of the same basic ethics rules. You should not be taking gifts from billionaires when you are a federal employee. Is that controversial? Holy guacamole, no. And that's what we're looking for here. It's the stuff that all of us get this. This is not right, and we know it's not right. And it's not right whether you like the decisions the Supreme Court has made or you don't like them. It is wrong, and Congress has the authority and must exercise that authority to make sure that all these federal employees, including those 9 that sit on that high bench actually follow some basic rules of ethics.
Nice to see you, Elizabeth
Good to see
Warren.
you.
Thank you very much for coming in,
Senator
Senator Warren.
Elizabeth
We really
Warren.
appreciate it.